Greetings, this is Amy Wentley with Chai Knuckles Knitting, and this is episode 2020-19, the Orime sweater, shoulder seaming, top to side seam. I'm teaching an online Zoom class on the Orime sweater. It's a Brooklyn tweed pattern by Veronique Avery, and it requires a lot of different finishing techniques. And so this is going to be a series of 6 videos. This first one is on shoulder seaming, and that's a top to side seam. The second will be on the collar extension seam, which is a top to top seam. The third and the fourth will go together in one video. It's the collar extension to outside back seam. That's a top to side seam. And also the folded collar extension to the inside back seam. That's a whip stitch. The fourth video will be overlapped collar, bottom collar seam. That's the Kitchener stitch. The fifth video will be side seams. That'll be side to side seams. And then the last video will be for armhole finishing. And that talks about doing an applied I-cord. Before you get started with any seam, you'll want to start with a figure 8 knot. And so imagine here that these lines on this photograph are my yarn. So I'm going to thread some yarn on a darning needle like this. And I will start out by coming underneath the first stitch in the cast on. Then I will come underneath on the second piece, and I will come underneath again on the third piece. And that makes a figure 8 knot that I pull tight, and I'm ready to get started. And I will demonstrate that in a moment. And you can use that same knot at the end of your seam. Now, before you start seaming, you are going to want to arrange your pieces together and pin them so that you're ready to start seaming. If you, what you can do too is make sure that you count the stitches and that you have an even amount of stitches that you'll be working as you go. And you'll set markers so that you'll know where you are. Now, with this shoulder seam, we're going to be joining the top of the back. And this is actually not the top, it's the side of the back. And your fabric is going to look a little like this, only smaller. This is the edge treatment that they have in the pattern, and that's 4 stitches. And that occurs right here along the edge. And you are going to be joining this to the top seam of the front. And that one's going to look a lot like this. So your top seam will be here, stitches going this way. That's the top. And this is actually a side seam, not a top seam. And so what you want to do is arrange your pieces so that your back is here with that wide 4-stitch border, and that your front is here with the top abutting it. And you will want to line them up nicely and put some pins here. You can use straight pins like you would for blocking, or you could use markers too. I happen to have some straight pins here, and so this will just help get things a little bit lined up so I know what I'm working with. So if you do have a piece that's a little longer than the other, you can ease the stitches together and get them all as part of the seam. Okay? So let's get in with the demonstration. This is a photograph of these 2 pieces that I just showed you. And I put some pins in here. You won't do this, but I put some pins in here to highlight where there are ladders between the stitches. There's one here, one here, one here, one here on the back piece. And then there are V's here on the top of the front piece. See those V's? And what we're going to be doing is we're going to be joining the V's to the ladders on these 2 parts. So here is a graphic that might be able to help you understand how this is going to go too. What we're going to be doing is we're going to be coming under a V, and this is a V here. This stitch at the top of our front. we're going to be coming up under the V, and we're going to bring the yarn out, and we're going to go to the back piece, and we are going to scoop under one of these ladders and then come back down and come into the exact place that we came out. And we're going to do that again. We're going to go under all these stitches to come up through the next V. We're going to come up and scooch under this ladder and come down back where we started down here. You'll notice that I skipped a ladder. And what's going to happen is you're actually going to have more ladders on the back than you're going to have stitches at the top of the front. And so you are occasionally going to have to skip a ladder as you go along. So now I will demonstrate that so you can see how it works. Okay, so here's my back and here's my front. And I just want to point out too, make sure that your public sides are facing you. So this is reverse stockinette stitch here, and this is not. So I have pinned this in correctly. So what you need to do is make sure that you've got your public sides facing. So here we go. I fixed that. Okay. There you go. Okay, I'm going to start out with a figure 8 knot. I will show you how that's done. You're going to start, I'll take this pin out right now. You're going to start on the right side, and you're going to come up from the bottom on the cast, right in the cast on there. And you're going to pull your yarn through, and you're going to leave a tail that you'll be able to weave in later. Then you want to come up from the bottom also of the right hand piece. So you came up from the bottom here, and you're going to come up from the bottom on the left hand piece here. So just to orient you, this is my back, this is my front right now, and I'm going to be going up and making a seam here. And then to finish the figure 8 knot, I'm going to bring my yarn and my needle back up through the first place I went in, and that's going to make a knot. So I'm going to go ahead and pull that into a pretty tight knot. And this secures things. Your seam will not come apart now. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to turn this again, and I'm going to start at, this is the front top, and I'm going to start down here on the front. And what I want to do is I want to come up from under a V. So this is a V here. It's kind of hiding because it's in reverse stockinette, but you can see the V here. And I'm going to come under the stitch, and I'm going to come through the middle of the V. And I'm going to pull my yarn through. And I'm not going to pull it tight right now. I'm just going to let it lay there loose. Then I'm going to go up to the back piece. And the back piece has 4 rows of knit stitches. 1, 2, 3, and then this wonky one on the end. What I want to do is I want to get my ladders between the wonky row and the second row. So this is 4, 3, 2, and this is where I want to get the ladders. So I want to pull these apart, and don't feel bashful about tugging pretty well. And when I do that, I can find a ladder here. So here's a ladder, and I'm going to just take my needle under that ladder. And then I'm going to come back to the front piece and put my needle right back in where I started. Although what I'm going to do is I'm going to get ready to go into the next V. So the next V is right here. It's the next stitch over. And if you pull it apart, you can see that there is a V under there. So I'm going to put my needle through where I came out, but I'm going to come up through that V. And while you're doing this, you are going to want to work each V on the front, but you can skip ladders on the back. You just want to make sure that you're going to end up in the same place over here. So I'm going to go up here, and I'm going to go for the next ladder, which I can find right there. Scoop my needle under. And there you go. I've got that there. Now what you'll see here is I want to come back and I want to go back into the place that I came from. And then I'm going to scooch my needle to the next V, which is right here. So my needle goes right back where it came from, and then it's going to come up into the next V. I'm going to come up to the back. I'm going to find the next ladder. And go under that ladder. And then I will come back down where I started, and I will scoop over to come up on the next V. After you get about 4 or 5 stitches done, then what you can do is you can pull these stitches tight. And what happens is they kind of disappear. Look. So you can hardly see them at all anymore. And you have a beautiful seam right there. And you've got a row of knitting unbroken that runs along the back shoulder seam. So I would just keep going until you get to the end. When you get to the end of the seam, you'll go ahead and do another figure 8 and cut your yarn and weave in your ends, and you're fine. So that is the front to back shoulder seam. Please join me for the next video. Thank you. Bye-bye.